In mid-December 2008, a very strange story began making the rounds of the various news sites. This included both paranormal and mainstream outfits, most notably NBC News. The story was out of Malaysia and involved a would-be thief who claims that while robbing a home in Kuala Lumpur, a non-human entity intervened, stopping him. Further, the entity, which he referred to as, quote, a supernatural figure, prevented him from fleeing the premises. Every time he would try to escape, he would immediately get shoved back to the ground. Eventually, he just stopped trying, remaining captive in the home without food or water for the next 3 days, until the homeowners returned and found him. Speaking to the Star newspaper, police official Abdul Malik Hakim Johar claims that the owners found the 36-year-old man fatigued and dehydrated when they returned home from their vacation on Thursday, December 11th. He had apparently been in the home since around December 8th and had not consumed any food or water in that time, nor had he slept much. He was in such bad shape that the owners immediately called for an ambulance to rush him to the hospital. There he confessed to the break-in as well as the bizarre phenomena he encountered. It is unclear what happened to this man, as Abdul Johar nor any other officers were willing to speak to reporters about the incident afterwards. Kind of makes you want to talk to the owners to find out if the home had a history of being haunted. If indeed the house was haunted, it's interesting that the ghost, or whatever the entity is that lurks at that residence, actually chose to intervene in this burglary. For sure, this has to be one of the very few cases in which a ghost actually stopped a burglary in progress and, in a sense, subdued the suspect. Appearing in an 1854 newspaper, the Peterborough Intelligencer, there is a rather curious account of a balloonist who encountered an apparent duplicate of himself while in the clouds. Or did he? The account involves one Professor George Elliot, a hot air balloonist, who had set off from the village of Laxey in the Isle of Man. As he ascended into the clouds, he observed a very curious sight. I will read from the Intelligencer report. While among the clouds, he says it seemed to him as if he was in the midst of a large round glass globe, some 200 or 300 feet in diameter, against the side of which, opposite the sun, the shadow of Lady Isabella rested, some 5 or 6 times larger than the corporeal one. About halfway between him and the shadow, which seemed as if resting on the glass wall, another balloon was there of a size between the shadow and the real one, resting as if in a vacuum which displayed every color faithfully of the original. He then saw another Elliot, clad and with features like himself, and seemingly self-like. He then extended his own fingers, where he was mimicked by this image, and whether he extended one finger or more, or whatever he did, this figure duplicated exactly. When he would cause his balloon to oscillate, this balloon would move exactly like his. When he threw out more ballast to elevate himself, this figure went down instead of rising with him. And when he arose above the clouds into the rays of the unclouded sun, he left the mimic aeronaut below him. In the rays of the sun above the clouds, he found it so warm as to cause him to perspire freely, a state of heat never before experienced at this height, nearly 24,000 feet, where the air is very rarefied and genuinely very chilly. He then opened the valve for the purpose of descending, and as soon as he sank 1,000 or 2,000 feet, which he ascertained by barometrical indications, he felt as if he had entered an ice house, and a cold chill seized his whole person. Here he again met his mimic serial voyager, whom he kept in company for some time for philosophical motives, i.e., he wanted to study him. Whenever he moved sideways, this gentleman would move in the same direction, but when he moved up or down, the duplicate would move in a directly opposite way. And when he concluded to descend, the image moved upward until the tricolored flask was out of sight, where he could see the car and the aeronaut still standing in it, as if in a basket attached to nothing. He kept looking up until his head was disappeared, and at last his feet and basket ascended out of sight. Professor Elliot says that he has been up 101 times, but never saw anything in the form of an illusion like this before. I have to admit, I had a bit of trouble understanding this account, though I believe that the witness actually encountered a mirror-like sphere UFO high in the clouds, rather than a duplicate version of himself. At first reading, I initially assumed that Elliot might have actually encountered a type of portal, in which he glimpsed a parallel reality, and in that reality he observed a mirrored, bizarro world version of himself performing the same tasks, with minor variations. But I'm not so sure now after having discussed it with a friend. I don't believe that the second Elliot was mimicking him more than he was actually just looking into a mirror. In my opinion, he encountered a mirror. The surface of the object he encountered was a mirror reflecting everything. Surely even in 1854, this man would know what a mirror was and how they worked. Yet at no point does he indicate that he was looking at a mirror, but rather another person that looked and acted as he did. So that is strange, but I do believe that he might have simply been confused. He claims that their actions matched up perfectly, except for when he ascended and descended. The second Elliot would go the opposite direction. When Elliot went up, his double actually went down. This too suggests that he was looking into a mirror that encompassed the object, which was spherical. So as he went up into the sky and looked down, he could see himself moving away, because he was seeing his reflection, not unlike what would happen if one was to stand in front of a mirror and then take steps backward. The reflection would grow smaller the further away from the mirror the person traveled. I simply cannot explain why he felt warmer as he rose as opposed to cooler, as he should have been, as he himself indicated. That aspect of the encounter I found to be very strange, and I can offer no reason for it happening. I'm still not completely satisfied with his explanation that he encountered a spherical mirrored UFO, but that's really the only thing that kind of makes sense to me. In the end, it's a very bizarre case. I love this case. I sent it to Albert Rosales the day I found it. I didn't honestly know what to make of it. I read it a bunch of times, and Albert didn't really know what to make of it. He was kind of busy, but I think he read it, didn't really know what was going on, and we kind of agreed that it was probably a spherical object, like a mirror. He even says that he had come upon a globe. A glass globe in the sky. So it sounds like a really early UFO report. I think it was 1854, so that's a really early UFO report from this balloonist. The fact that he saw himself like duplicated, I don't really like. I thought about it. I don't really think that's what was happening. Like I said, I think he was looking at a mirror. But it's the way he describes it. It's strange because, like, I honestly, as I said, it was 1854. Mirrors existed. These people knew what mirrors were. They knew how they worked. But he didn't sound like he was. He didn't indicate that he was looking into a mirror, which you think he would have. He would have been like, hey, this is. I seen a mirror in the sky. He doesn't say that. He actually says that this thing was duplicating him. Everything he did, it was doing too. I have to wonder, say, if he had said that he had done it, and then a few seconds later, this duplicate mimicked his actions. That that's a little different. But he just said that this thing was doing what he was doing, and the only difference was that when he went up, this guy went down, or when he went down, this guy went up. It does sound like, to me, he was looking at a globe, and he was here, and then when he went up, he could still see his reflection, but because he was going up, it looked like he was moving away, but he really wasn't. He was just kind of moving back. And to me, that's sort of what I think was happening. But like I said, and the thing about when he went up, he said he started feeling really hot, and that's not normal. When you go up, you're supposed to get colder. And he found this strange. So I don't know. Maybe the object when he went up was giving off heat, and it was going up, and he was feeling that heat. When he came back down, why it got so cold was because that was the normal temperature. Again, I don't know. None of it really works. But it's the best thing I can think of. It's the only thing I can think of that explains what happened. Because, like I said, I don't really think he looked into a parallel world or anything. I don't think he came upon an opening in the clouds that allowed him to see like another version of our world, where there was another him that was duplicating everything he was doing. There's a film called VHS 3 or VHS Viral, where I think there was a bunch of stories. And in the second story, the guy, he creates this machine. He has this machine, and it opens up into a parallel world, an exact duplicate of Earth. And he's on one side of this machine, and on the other side of this machine, this portal, there's another him. And they're both doing exactly the same things. And because they're both in their parallel worlds, they're essentially the same person, interested in the same things, doing exactly the same things. So when they encounter, when this portal opens, there's another him there looking back at him. And, well, I don't want to talk about what happens in the movie, but I'm just saying that's what kind of I thought of when I read the story. Like, did he see like a parallel world where there was another him there on the other side, mimicking him? He didn't seem to acknowledge. He doesn't indicate any kind of acknowledgement. Like the guy didn't look back at him and kind of like there was. He doesn't say that. It was just that he saw this other dude or this other guy that was doing exactly what he was doing. Like I say, it's definitely a weird case. On October 17, 2016, a woman named Stacy had her encounter featured on an episode of Darkness Radio with Dave Schrader and Tim Dennis. Her experience, if true, offers a chilling glimpse of what might await us all at the moment of death. Stacy, now in her 50s, claims that when she was 7 years old, she recalled the night her Aunt Millie died. Stacy noted that she and her Aunt Millie had always had a special bond. Millie doted on her, and Stacy absolutely adored her aunt in return. Did this mutual affection play a role in what was to come next? When I was about 7, she came to spend the night at her house, as she often did. I went to bed, and then, in the early AM hours, I woke up to hear my aunt crying, and I figured out she was feeling sick. Then I heard the ambulance arrive, and the paramedics coming in the house to help her. I heard them climb the stairs to go to her room. When they arrived, her crying became worse, and I could hear the terror in her voice. It was tearing at my heart to hear her fear. She kept talking to my father, saying, "Please, Bobby, I don't want to go. Don't let them take me." It was just heart-wrenching. I can still hear that fearful crying to this day. When Stacy awoke the next morning, she was told by her parents that her beloved Aunt Millie had passed away. Stacy elected not to discuss with her parents what she had heard that night, as it was just too upsetting. Though some 40 years later, while Stacy and her mother were having a conversation about Aunt Millie, Stacy decided to tell her about how she was awake the night the ambulance arrived to take Millie to the hospital, that she had heard her cries in fear. At this point, her mother began to insist that it was simply not possible that she heard her, as Millie had actually passed away before the ambulance had even arrived. The cry she heard that night could not have come from Aunt Millie. Stacy knew that this could not be correct, as she was absolutely certain that she had heard her aunt that night begging to not let them take her. How had I heard her cries in fear if she was already dead? Why did no one else hear it? It took me 40 years to realize that I'd heard her from wherever comes next. Oftentimes, patients that are near death will describe encountering Grim Reaper-type beings who seem to be there to collect them. The story reminded me of that. However, Stacy's account differs because her aunt had already passed, and Stacy really should not have been able to hear her. Was the bond between Stacy and Millie so strong that it actually allowed Stacy to tune into her aunt's pleas for help from the other side? We've all heard accounts in which people get phone calls from family members who have passed on, so I assume this is something similar. That said, it does cause me to ask, who was Aunt Millie talking about? Who had come to take her away, and to where? Her post-death moments sound far from pleasant, so it makes me wonder what comes next. What comes after we take our last breath.